Hello, this is Dijoxin, and today I'm going to be doing hopefully the first of many videos and breaking down the universe that I've made for my stories. Three disclaimers before we start. Number one is that I'm far from an artist, and I'm using basically every tool I can to make this presentable. Just thought some visual aid would be nice. And number two is that I'm doing this all in one take, so there's no script, but I should be able to remember everything off the top of my head. I've been doing this for long enough. And number three is I can't figure out how to get the mouse to stop clicking in OBS, so you're going to have to live with hearing that. Anyway, this first episode I want to focus on just an introduction to everything, a very brief flyover of everything in as much detail as I can in a short time possible. So this right here is everything. This is the entire encapsulation of the universe, and it's based on the mathematical equation of squaring a circle. Of course, not many people are going to understand that, so what I'm instead going to compare it to, which has disappeared immediately, is a pizza. I'm sure you can immediately see the similarities. So you've got the box here. I need the brush, hang on one sec. I need the brush here. So we've got the box here, which is clearly the square. We've got the pizza, which is the circle. We've got the slices, which are the numbers here. And we've also got this in the middle, which correlates to abruptum. So what are we looking at here? Well, each of these slices represents a dimension. As in, if you were to draw something on a piece of paper, that would be a two-dimensional drawing. We exist in the third dimension. Then you might go watch a movie in 3D and it'll like come out at you. Ooh. And then fourth dimension is time. And then it's so on and so forth. And each of these dimensions in these slices are every possible alternate universe that could exist using that dimension alone. So you can't find two-dimensional multiverses in the first dimension. And I thought that was just a nice, clean way to make sure that we're not wasting alternate universes. So that's what that all is. Here in the middle, we have abruptum, which is closest to relating to the afterlife. And it's where God of this universe is. God is not a word that's used. The God in this scenario is called a lord. That's the tier of deity that he is. So that's a lord that lives in the middle of abruptum. It's God. It's just one person that's the ruler of everything. It's God, as far as everything's concerned. Up in the top right, we've got, well, actually, sorry, I should specify, in all the corners where there is negative space and it's not part of the dimensions, this is sort of where rules don't exactly apply dimensionally. So these are outliers. So up here we've got the Watchers, which are basically just the eyes for the Lord in abruptum. He doesn't go anywhere himself really, so he sends out the Watchers who have their own little space up here, and they do all the work for him. And then of course we've got the actual box of the pizza, or the square around it. That just marks the edge of everything. Nothing is beyond, but there's stuff beyond that, but it never influences the stories. It's never important, and it doesn't matter. So, I've drawn a circle. It's not what I wanted to do. Cut that out. Okay, so you might notice that we have three sections here that are in red, and that is because these three areas, Hatus Caius, Umrali, and the third dimension, they're the most significant. I will just quickly mention the question mark here is because I don't have anything there. So, these three areas are the most important, and I'm going to go over each one of them as quickly as possible, and that will probably be the end of the video. So, third dimension is the most important, by far. This is a sci-fi setting, somewhere around 20-30,000 AD. I mean, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of years in the future, so I can do whatever I want there, and it doesn't affect anything. And so, let me find the right thing. The main things at play here are the factions. So, we've got three main factions, which are going to be factions that are there from the absolute start, and they're the main influences of everything. So we've got the New Age Kingdom, which is what Britain and England eventually becomes this far into the future. These guys believe in technology progression in absolutely any cost whatsoever. They're mainly made up of robots, and their leader is just a supercomputer. So this faction does absolutely anything to have a technological edge on all the other factions. Then we also have the United Species Alliance, which is what the America eventually becomes. USA still holds that. This is where I have to unfortunately confirm that furries, aka anthropomorphic animals, are canonized in my universe. The United Species Alliance prides itself on having the largest population, mostly organic, and every single animal is treated the same. Everyone is a person, all exactly the same, and there is no differentiation between each other, and that's about it. They win by numbers of them. That's their strength, I suppose. And their technology isn't too bad either. We also then have the Galactic Union of Power, or the GUP. The GUP is what Russia eventually becomes. That's the third superpower. That's the inspiration, at least. And the GUP basically believes that some species are better than other species, naturally. So these species are given special treatment. They're put above other species. Basically, it's kind of a speciesist, racist faction, to be honest. But their idea is that these superior species are stronger, and therefore they can take over the galaxy through power. That's their whole thing. They're the brunt force faction, and they do everything by force. Don't have very good technology, don't have very many people, but the people they do have are bloody strong. So these three factions are of course the main factions. On the third dimension, in the sci-fi setting, the idea is that there was a great expansion where the entire galaxy was taken, and for some reason whatsoever, they couldn't progress further than the Milky Way galaxy, and so a war broke out that has been going on for centuries. And these are the three main competitors in this war who have something to gain. We also have the DLC factions, which I'm going to call them. These are factions that either get introduced later into the storyline, or don't have as big of an impact. For instance, the Conglomerate is around since the start of the storyline, but they don't have that big of an impact. The Conglomerate I could most easily associate with maybe the SCP Foundation, if you're familiar with that online. They sort of don't interact with the war, they're sort of the only middle ground in the war. Everyone allies with them, and no one dares mess with them because they could probably wipe everyone out if they cared to. But they're the smallest faction, they only really have one giant ship that they all live on, and they work around anomalous items and magics and the likes, which is the only source of it in the third dimension, because everything else is technology. We also have WIRE. That stands for Worming Intelligence Reaugmentation. I've forgotten the E, I'm going to be honest. I don't know what the E was. Maybe Entity? I don't know. WIRE was originally made by the New Age Kingdom. Hang on, let's do a little connecting line here. Oh, very nice. So the WIRE was originally made by the New Age Kingdom as a sort of symbiotic idea, where it's, believe it or not, wires that are controlled by an artificial intelligence within themselves. And they could be used to reinforce bone, to stitch wounds together immediately mid-battle, to repair machinery temporarily until a proper repair can be done. The idea was to have a massive edge in being able to basically have unstoppable soldiers and vehicles. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work that way. There's a series of 3 different things that happen, and WIRE ends up breaking free and becomes its own faction. This ends up being a lot like the Flood from Halo, Tyranids from 40k. I'm trying to think of a movie thing, but I can't, so I'm not going to bother. Basically, more or less just a big hive mind that does its own thing, and its only goal is to assimilate mass and grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And that Wire basically goes against absolutely everyone. Wire doesn't take sides, Wire doesn't care, Wire just wants to kill. And that's a very late faction that's added. Around the same time, just a bit after Wire, we also get New Umrali, which you might notice down here, we have Umrali here. Eventually Umrali, or part of it, ends up in the third dimension, and that leads to the faction of New Umrali being founded by the leader of Umrali. And New Umrali doesn't do much, but it's sort of just there. They have some buildings, they have some vehicles and whatever, but we'll soon see why it doesn't exactly come too far, because we're going to move on to Umrali next. So Umrali's the bottom left corner here, and this is a very personalised area. It's not sci-fi. This one's a lot more medieval. This one focuses a lot less on factions and more on characters and events. So here's the characters and events. Mal and Usur, the priest and priestess, are heavily connected characters. Mal is basically an embodiment of war, and Usur is an embodiment of magic. And these two rule Umrali together as the priest and priestess. It's a very religious medieval area. And these two rule together. They're kind of like demigods, I think is the best way to put it. They don't die of age, they're very resilient, they're very powerful. They've been around basically as long as Umrali's been around. And they were created by Ocnia, who's the lord in Abruptum in the middle here. He's their disciple. So, sorry, they're his disciples. Eventually they have an offspring, which is Sal, daughter of Umrali. Possibly the most important character, full stop. She will definitely be getting her own video by herself in the future, once I'm ready to take on that task. There's not much more to say. She's in Umrali for until she's an adult, and then a bit after she becomes an adult, she leaves Umrali and does her own thing. And that'll, of course, be covered in her main video, but she's a very, very important character. We also have Corundum, Legend of Luck. You might notice that everything from Umrali sort of has their own title as well. Very intentional, because it makes it look cool. So Corundum is sort of a legend. Some people say he exists, some people say he doesn't. It's sort of up to you to decide. But the idea is that he was a very powerful warrior, and during the time of the Civil War, which we'll get to here, he sort of did his own thing. He didn't choose a side in the Civil War, and he spurred on a movement of atheism, which basically said, let's just live how we want to live, not burdened by religion. And he fought for a long time for it, and then eventually died for his cause, and sort of sprouted an extra movement of good hundreds of people following in his footsteps. We have Think. That is the, I think it's still used in Iceland. That's Thorn, that little letter there. And it's just a TH sound, like a th. So you think of THE, the word. Well, it's right here, isn't it? So that's all that sound is. So you think the Unhinged Jester. Jester is a very unique species. That's what he is. The Jester is actually his species, it's not just his job. A Jester is associatable to a lord, which is what the god is. It could be argued to be above or below it, but either way, Think is a very important character, and is actually the main reason Umrali was built as a sort of a cage for Think. Think's basically a trickster god. He's kind of like Loki from Marvel, if you want to go that route. He causes chaos, he does his own thing, he has no regard for anything else. Again, a very, very significant character, but one that will definitely get to the video as well. Now we move on to the events. So we have the pay tax, again using that Thorn letter there, and the Ash letter here, which is an A and E, it's just the A sound, so the pay tax. This is basically a golden age. So Mal and Usur came at basically the start of Umbrali's history, and at that time it was tribes, you know, pre-Bronze Age cavemen. It was cavemen time. Let's be sorry, it's caveman time. That's when they came around. And they rallied all of the species there, which is a unique species entirely made up by myself called the Galactic. Fun little Easter egg is that it just means corner dog in Latin, because they're in the corner and they all look like dog people. So, corner dog. The Galactic were rallied under Usur and Mal, and that led to an age called the Paytax, which, well, it was perfect. Everyone was unified under one religion, under one goal, and worked together perfectly. And that went on for millennia. Red Famine. Red Famine is a very serious illness that is secretly doing a through thing in later years. And it leads to, well, the famine part leads to crops rotting, while the red part leads to illness in the actual people of Umrali, which main symptom is gradually increasing nosebleeds, which are eventually lethal. People just die of having a severe nosebleed at the very end of this illness. Very few people survive it, and Sal up here actually ends up getting red famine, despite the fact that Mal and Usur are immune to it because of their deity status. Civil War. This is in yellow, because I don't like the colour yellow, and Civil War is bad, so it makes perfect sense. Civil War is started when Mal and Usur have a disagreement about how Sal is to be raised. And this leads to two different religions sprouting off. Mal sticks to the original religion, which is Omni-Oknia, which believes that there's only one god in the middle, right here. Whereas Usur, in the time of everyone's need during Red Famine, spreads the idea there might be a second god. I actually forgot the name of that religion, which is not great. Bivinity. It was Bivinity, because Bi means two, vinity, like divinity. So Bivinity. And they spread the idea that Oknia, the all god in the middle, is still a thing. I don't know what I've done there. It's still a thing. But there is also another god in another afterlife, and that's sort of, it's a heaven and hell scenario. And everyone should follow Usur, which the majority of people did. And led to a massive civil war that went on for probably decades, as to who was to win. And eventually, spoilers, Mal won and killed Usur because he didn't know who she was actually in the end. And eventually Mal ends up leading what's left of Umrali to the third dimension, which is what creates New Umrali. So finally, you might be noticing that the two sides of the screen are covered already, but we still have one red area left. That's because Catus Caius is what I'm currently working on. I don't have a finished idea for Catus Caius yet. I know it's once going to be medieval. These two areas, oh, hang on, I've ruined that line a bit. These two areas are part of basically a part 1, which all ends with wire. And then part 2 and 3 are all going to be focused around Catus Caius. Catus Caius is basically the magic dump, so to put it. Oknia, who is the god in the middle, the lord, does not want magic. Well, so that's why this is sci-fi, and this is why there is a very reduced magic here, only really for these three. So all that magic has to go somewhere. It goes up here, into Catus Caius. So Catus Caius' main inspiration is stuff like Dark Souls. I know that there is basically a giant beast that they consider it, which is actually a part of the conglomerate ship, which ends up there. And I know that Think ends up being the main villain for part 2 in Catus Caius. after everything happens in the third dimension at the end of part 1. That's about it. That's about all I know for Gator Skies. All I know is it's medieval. It's going to be... My main challenge is going to be trying to combine the best parts of these two things. So characters and events and factions. I want to try and combine them both. And I want this to be the best of the best because it's going to last for 2 parts. That's, I think, about all I need to go over for this first section. Hopefully the video wasn't too long. But I think the next video is going to be a storyline analysis. I have part 1 solid, part 2 is mostly done, and part 3 I don't have much for, but we'll cover that when we get to it. But hopefully this is interesting. Hopefully this has interested you, and hopefully I've given a good enough flyover of the main components that people are going to be interested to see where it goes deeper. So thank you for watching. Very awesome. And I'll see you in the next episode where I go over the storyline.